Hello guys, and welcome back to another unit guide video for the Lord of the Rings Total War mod for Rome Remastered. Today we'll be going over Dale and their units, and so without further ado, let's kind of just jump on in. So I kind of have this one a little bit differently too. So I kind of have three different tiers of infantry, and then missile units, and then Cav units. And so let's just begin with our first tier of infantry. So here we got basically you're just melee garbage for the faction. You got peasant militia and then Dale and farmers, which look at the militia, only 2 attack, 8 defense. They do have a bonus versus fighting Cav units and excellent morale, which, you know, for a peasant unit that's okay, but really these units are kind of like your settlement public order units, because we even look at the farmers here. Their stats are even worse, and the only thing they have is excellent morale, and they're very fast. But these units they're not military worthy by any means. They're vulnerable to any missile unit in the game. Even though the militia do have a bonus versus Cav, they're just not going to they're not gonna like hold the line by any means against Cav units eventually, or even other melee units. These guys are just, I mean, they're garbage units, and that's okay. Factions are gonna have some of those units that just aren't going to really serve that big of a purpose in armies, and you know, that's just how it is. So I wouldn't recommend putting these guys in your armies. However, they are fairly cheap, and so they make really good units to just leave in your settlements just to maintain public order. But yeah, other than that, I wouldn't really put too many of them in your armies, if any at all, really. Just leave them in your settlements while your other units are out doing the fighting. That's really their main purpose, in my opinion. So moving on to our second section. These are kind of like your still low to mid tier kind of units, but these units can go into your armies. Slide them around here just so I have them sort of in order. But if we look at the Spearmen of Dale, they got a little better morale compared to the Peasant Militia. They got little melee attack just by 1, but their melee defense is better. They got higher defense skill. They still have the bonus fighting Cav unit, or stat, or trait, sorry. They don't have a shield, so they are very susceptible to missiles still, but they will perform better in terms of holding the line against the enemy units. They're much better at holding the line. They will fight better against Cav units, kind of like low to mid tier Cav. They will, you know, they'll hold a little bit, but again, it's nothing like, you know, you can kind of just leave them here set up and have the enemy run into them, and you won't have to worry about them, because they are still pretty squishy, meaning that they're not the strongest and they're not going to hold forever, but they are definitely an improvement from the peasant militia spearman unit. So early on, they're not bad to get, just because you will need some units to hold the line while your other units do the damage. So, you know, for a you know, low tier unit, they're not bad. You'll get your value out of them, but they're not going to be your damage dealers. Moving on to the Axemen of Dale. If we zoom around here and look at their unit cards, these guys are your flankers. They got pretty good melee attack and decent morale, and they're very fast moving. But other than that, need to be very careful for missile units. They are very susceptible to them. They don't have any shield. Their armor is fairly low. You really just want to make sure that the enemy starts firing at other units first, and then send them around to flank, because that's really where these guys shine. If we take a look at their stats again, their melee attack and defensive skill allow them to perform fairly well as long as you keep them flanking, which is what you want them to be doing. They do have quite a few numbers, so cycle charging them is kind of difficult to do. I don't have a lot of these in my armies. Usually I actually go with some other units, which I'll talk about later on in the video. But if you do want to get some axemen and get some flanking units, these guys, you know, they'll do their value. Just really got to watch out for enemy missile units, because they will basically be kind of like butter. They'll just melt against missile units. But other than that, for Dale, a good like starter to flanking infantry. Moving on to the last unit of like the mid to early tier units is the the militia of Dale. These guys, they're okay. You see here, if we look at their stats, a morale of 22 is, it's all right. It's about average in the game. Melee attack is 3, defense is 15. Really, these guys are not. These are not damage dealers, but they hold the line. They got a shield to help protect them against missile units, so they will, be better about defending themselves against other missile units compared to the first 4 units that we've talked about here. And they will hold the line to a certain extent, but sort of like the Spearmen of Dale, they will not last forever. So really look into getting some stronger units or missile units, or like the Axemen of Dale here to flank a enemy unit that are engaged with the militia of Dale here, because they will eventually they will break down, and they definitely need support. But they do their job of holding the line fairly well, and again they have that shield to help them protect themselves against some missile units for that initial volley against any enemy missile units that they may have. And really for their price point and what you want them to do, they do their job fairly well. But other than that, let's move on to the third tier, which is like their Dale's kind of like high tier melee units and whatnot. All of these units I really like. Starting with the Bjornings, which this unit does depend on region, so I think it's like Beorn's Halls, you're able to get them. But this is kind of a upgrade from the Axemen of Dale, which kind of the same rules apply. Just look out for missile units. Obviously, you can tell just by looking at them. They don't really have they don't have basically any armor. They obviously don't have shields, but these got these giant two-handed axes that look really, really cool. And if we look at their stats are pretty good. They're really heavy hitters. They got great morale, great melee attack, really heavy charge, a decent defensive skill. These guys are really, their main and only purpose is flanking. They do have a spread out formation, which will help a little bit with missile units, but their entities are just bigger models to begin with, so they are still susceptible to missiles, basically any missile unit. But looking at their traits, they do have 2 hit points, which basically means they can die twice. Excellent morale, powerful charge, very good stamina, so they'll fight longer and fight better longer than other units. One thing you do need to be on the lookout for is that they can go berserk and they may charge without orders. It's happened to me a few times where I've had a few units and armies, and I'm working on getting them like around the enemy, getting them to flank, that kind of thing, and then they're, say this is the enemy unit here, and they get right here. Instead of listening to me and getting around like right here to flank them, they just charge right into my own units and negate their charge bonus. So be on the lookout for that, and then once they do start taking damage, get them out before they go berserk, because berserk is just kind of like Rampage. If you guys are unfamiliar with older titles, older Total War titles anyway, berserk and Rampage is the same thing, and you just lose control of the unit. So this unit, though, being smaller for a flanking unit, you can get them out of combat faster and easier than the Axemen of Dale, just because they have fewer entities. They got a little more of a push, so they can get in and get out a lot faster. But for flanking units, this is a really good unit. You'll get your value out of them. Just really be careful for missile units and them going berserk, because it'll make you worry a little bit on whether or not the unit may even survive if they go Rampage and their health is starting to get really low. But overall, really good flanking unit. Moving on to the Honor Guard. This is what some of your general's bodyguards will be. Really cool units. They got some shields. They got a decent armor all around them. They got some helmets. If we look at their stats, really good melee unit. High morale, decent melee attack, but really These guys are just kind of here to hold the line and grind the enemy down. Because if we look at their defense, their armor, defensive skill, shield, it's all, hold the line type of stats. They do have 2 hit points, so they will, essentially they can die twice again. So they will be able to hold the line even longer than, say, like the militia of Dale and the lower tier units. But for a general's bodyguard unit, it's okay. It's not the craziest thing you'll see in the game, but it's not bad either. You can rely on them to a pretty good extent of holding the line fairly well. Just being a general's bodyguard unit, just make sure they don't take too much damage, because you obviously don't want your general to die. Moving on. Oh, sorry. I get my stuff mixed around here. The Dragon Knights. Dragon Knights are really great units. If we look at their stats here, they got 6 melee attacks, melee defense is 17. They're just really good armor piercing units. If you look at these their traits here, they're effective against armor. They got great morale. They're well armored, good stamina. If we look at the actual units themselves, they got these giant like long swords, kind of like Aragorn's sword in the 3rd movie here. They don't have a shield, which, kind of immediately, if you see a unit, like a melee unit, not have a shield, you can kind of assume that they are going to be a little weaker against missile units. So they are weaker there against like axes. So look out for enemy missile units, excuse me, that have like 60 range. So like the Dwarven Warsmiths, for example, and playing the game, you'll kind of know going into a battle, like, okay, I need to be on the lookout for these type of missile units, because having high armor, a lot of, just thinking about it, missile units that do a lot of armor piercing are going to shred the Dragon Knights. So just be on the lookout for that, because a lot of the Dale infantry, as you can probably have noticed in me talking about it, a lot of them are fairly susceptible to missile units. So just be on the lookout for that. But a really great unit other than that. And lastly, your last melee unit here is the Sword Guards of Dale. It's kind of just a buffed up version of the Militia of Dale, really. They, comparing stats, they got more melee attack, more morale, more defense, good stamina in the trait section here, the trait box here. Other than that, though, these are your like hold the line infantry. Out of all of these guys will, other than the general's bodyguard unit, because obviously you're not going to have 19 generals in an army. This unit here. So these guys eventually down the road in your campaigns, these guys will be your main frontline infantry. I usually do a good combination of these guys, the Sword Guards of Dale with the Spearmen of Dale, just so I have some anti-large in there. So cav, monsters, that kind of thing. But for the bulk part of it, not a lot of armies that you'll face will have 18 units of cav units or trolls or whatever. So for the most part, you can go into a lot of battles with just these guys if you wanted, because their big role is just to hold the line. And they got the means to do so. They got good melee defense, they got the shield, they got the defensive skill, they got the armor to protect themselves fairly well. While your damage dealers, which we will go into next, will be doing, obviously, the damage. So for Dale, for their big damage dealers for their faction are their missile units. They only have 2, but their 2 missile units are very good. In my opinion, out of all of the other archer units in the game, Dale probably has some of the best in terms of like the men factions. Obviously, the elves have the best units, or the best missile units, excuse me. But if we look at the stats here, the Dalian bowmen, like I carry these guys even through the late stages in my campaign, just because the Bardian archers are, I believe, a region recruitment based, while these guys can be recruited basically from a lot of the regions around Dale. These guys are just very select regions. And I mean, even if we look at them, obviously their melee stats are pretty crappy, but they got really good missile attack for a first tier missile unit, got tons of ammo, and they got really good range. And then if we just look at the Bardian archers, it's just the Dalian bowmen on steroids, basically. More missile attack, more range, more ammo, and then more melee attack. So if you do get into melee, they will hold a little longer. But really good missile units, really great. A lot of damage dealing, get a couple hundred kills in battles with these guys at least. Definitely worth their value. Really good units. In most of my Dale armies, I probably, a combination. I got probably at least 10 to 12 missile units in the armies because these guys will just shred armies like it's freaking butter. It's really fun to see, which I'm a little biased towards missile units anyway, just because they're really good. But they're also really fun to see because these guys they do their value and it's really fun to watch. And then lastly, you have your 2 Cav units, which Dale has some pretty good Cav as well. Going with their melee Cav here, they don't have spears, so it's not the greatest Cav units in the game, and they don't have a shield either. So they are pretty susceptible to missile units, so be on the lookout for that. But they are pretty sturdy units. They got good morale, really good morale for Dale. Good melee attack, good defense. They got a good charge. Just be on the lookout for missile units. But they're really good, at like flanking the enemy, getting around them, taking out missile units, smashing the enemy in the back while the Swords Guard and the Spearmen of Dale are holding the line. A really good Cav unit. Obviously, they only have one for Dale, but really for Dale, you'll be prioritizing, I would think anyway, you'll be using more missile units, just because that's what Dale really relies on. And these guys are, for their only Cav unit, these guys are really good. So definitely have 1 or 2 units of these guys in the army just to help run down enemy units as well. That way, if you're fighting a big battle and, the enemy routes, say, at 70% of the health, you can, run down hopefully another 10 to 20% of them at least. That way, when you fight the enemy again over the next turn or whenever it may be, they're not as healthy as they would have been if you didn't have units that can chase them down. And then your last unit is the Dalian Outriders, a really good missile unit. Obviously terrible in melee. Don't throw these guys in. Once they use their missiles, just if anything, just use these guys to take enemy units away. So a lot of times, what I'll do with these guys is kind of send them out and harass the enemy, and then once they've ran out of ammo, just keep periodically like moving them. Obviously if I would start the battle, they wouldn't just be jumping like this, but getting them to move this way or getting them to move that way, and just getting the enemy to send 1 or 2 units away from like the where the fight actually is going on, just to keep other units out of the fight. Because the other thing too is you have to think eventually as the battle goes on, if the battle is way over here by these peasant militia units, and they have 2 or 3 units following 1 horse archer unit, doing nothing, it's more likely than not at that point they'll be away from their army. They'll have lower leadership because they are away from their general and other units, and it may even trigger basically the enemy to withdraw faster because they think they're away from their army. They're like, shit, we're screwed, let's just run away. But in terms of missile damage, these guys are really good. A decent missile attack, decent ammo, but the big thing here is their range. They can shoot 360 degrees. If I zoom out here a little bit, that's a giant area that they can be shooting from. Obviously, ideally, you want them to be shooting directly in front and not, an enemy unit behind them shooting. You want them to be facing where they are shooting. But, if it needs to happen, again, if I zoom out here, they can shoot a giant radius, a giant diameter here to shoot around them. So a really good unit, really good to just harass the enemy while also getting a good amount of kills. But with that being said, that is the Dale roster. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you have not already. I do appreciate the support, and I will see you guys again later. Bye.